Snowstorms and anything else that's happening around here this week. Got the Terps playing on Thursday night against Xavier down in Orlando. The Caps and the Wizards back out on the ice in the hard courts after long West Coast trips, and certainly the Caps with their tail between their legs and trying to hang on to that President's Trophy thing and some homecoming. And we've talked about the World Baseball Classic and all things Orioles and Orioles related with Adam Jones and Manny Machado and Jonathan Scope all running around the world and playing baseball. But the Ravens were the talk of the town all weekend. Luke Jones here, of course, monitoring all things Ravens and getting the WNST texts out, all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. You were a busy soul over the weekend, not even with the Big Ten tournament notwithstanding in baseball. It was active for the Ravens, and I know we're all going to be judging this for years to come in regard to the Brandon Williams situation and the players that the Ravens allowed to get out, but not a bad weekend for the Ravens, and certainly if you would have said to me they're going to keep Brandon Williams, I would have said, I'm okay with that. I like that move.
Yeah. It's clear that they prioritize Brandon Williams, and we can discuss whether they extended too far in re-signing him as far as making him the highest-paid nose tackle in the NFL, eclipsing what happened with Damon Harrison with the Giants last year. But the Ravens they made it very clear that he was that important to what they do, and the big question is now, how does that impact everything else they do? Now, they signed Tony Jefferson, clearly an upgrade over Ladarius Webb, who they let go on Friday, and not a big surprise there. We had talked about that possibility. But we see the pieces that they've lost, specifically on offense, Rick Wagner, Kyle Juszczyk, and they lost Lawrence Guy over the weekend in New England, so the defense takes a hit there. I think that's probably an underrated loss there as far as a challenge of replacing a pretty good player there who necessarily didn't get a whole lot of attention but was a productive player. So it's all about what other pieces can you add between now and the draft. And I think very clearly there's a lot of work to be done to the offense. I think defensively there's still some things they want to do, edge rusher, corner, but it's clear that this team has been very active. No one, for all the years we've talked about Ozzie Newsome at this time of year, doing what? Sitting on his hands. That's the.
Well, they've never had cap space. I mean,
right.
But part of it is they've got cap space because the whole league has more cap space, but everybody else has more cap space too.
Yeah, well, and they had to cut a lot of players to do that. I mean, Sharice Wright, Kendrick Lewis, Elvis Dumerville, Ladarius Webb, Dennis Pitta takes a contract restructure. So it's clear that they've made some sacrifices here. And look, I'm not saying that some of those players that I mentioned were crucial to the future of the team, but you still have to replace those guys. Lawrence Guy might not be a deal breaker kind of player, but you still have to replace his production.
And New England's happy to have him, by the way.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just it's all part of that puzzle. And for the Ravens, that two big pieces that they've one they didn't add, they kept in Brandon Williams, and Tony Jefferson being the big one that they've added. Danny Woodhead, a nice piece. We'll see how he looks from a health standpoint at age 32 and coming back from an ACL. But it's clear they still have a lot of work to do, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. I asked Ozzie Newsome on Friday during the Jefferson Danny Woodhead press conference if the financial commitments they've made to the defensive side of the ball, if he still feels confident that they can do what they need to do offensively. And he was very matter-of-fact saying, we're not done yet. So I don't get the impression whatsoever that the Ravens are done in free agency. May not see a blockbuster, and face it, there probably aren't many blockbuster deals out there at this point as we kind of get into the second and third wave of free agency. But I think it's very clear Ravens still want to do some things to augment this roster before they get to the draft next month.
All right, so you said edge rusher and corner. In what order do you think the real need here is? I think it's corner. I think the edge rusher, and by the way, this draft is supposed to have some defensive players on it, right? And certainly both of those positions feel to be, 5 to 10 deep with prospects. And, of course, some of those guys will be suspects before it's all over with. But it does feel like if the Ravens want a corner or a rush edge, in the middle of this first round, they can have one. There's going to be something there that fits into that box far much more than, let's say, replacing Rick Wagner at this point or drafting Jeremy Zutta's replacement or taking yet another gander on another wide receiver, especially if they believe in Perryman.
Yeah, well, I think wide receiver is a huge need. I'm not going to, even though their track record certainly, I would understand being leery of drafting another receiver. I think wide receiver is their biggest need right now because you're going to line up with Mike Wallace and Brashad Perriman. You don't have anyone as an intermediate option. But going back to what you said about edge rusher and corner, there are going to be some appealing options there. Now, unfortunately, over the weekend, one of those was lost, a guy that had actually been linked to the Ravens in some mock drafts. The cornerback out of Washington, Sidney Jones, blows out his Achilles during his pro day. Just really unfortunate for him. So
he had several mock drafts that said he was. He's a guy we would have been talking about the next 6 weeks because we would have been forced to talk about him. Honestly,
yeah.
Right?
So now, with the case of him, when does he get drafted? I mean, does some team take a chance on him, say in the third round, knowing that he's essentially going to redshirt? So that takes one option out of play there. But it's a very deep draft for corners. That's been well established. It's a good draft for edge rushers. I'm in agreement with you that if I had to guess right now, and look, a lot of this is still going to change with pro days, and inevitably someone will get arrested or something will come out, and it kind of adjusts the draft board.
Well, we had a gas mask bong video last year, surfaced 5 minutes before the draft started. So at that
like
point, anything is on the table at that point, right?
Yeah. So there's still a whole lot that can happen. We're still 6 weeks out from the draft, so there's still a lot of time there. But it does look most likely like edge rusher, corner are those two spots right now where the Ravens sit at 16, where you'd say, okay, that feels right there. Now, Corey Davis drops to them, and they really love Corey Davis, and there are people out there who think he can be a legitimate number one receiver in this league. Maybe that changes things, but at this point, you don't necessarily get a sense that he's going to fall down the draft board that far, and that a team's not going to snatch him up. But it's clear this team has they have plenty of needs at this point. I mean, and the good news is they don't start the season for 6 months here, a little under 6 months. So they still got some time in that regard. But they're still, even with the money that they've spent, even with the additions that they've made, very clear the losses that they've sustained and positions that we knew they already needed to address that haven't been addressed yet. So a lot of work, and inevitably they'll go into OTAs, they'll go into training camp, and you know what? There's going to be a couple of these positions that we talk about, whether it's right tackle. I remember 2 years ago at this time we were talking about who's going to replace Michael Orr. I guess 3 years ago I should say. Who's going to replace Michael Orr at right tackle? And there was so much speculation, and what ended up happening? The Ravens knew they had Rick Wagner, and he ended up being an above-average tackle. So maybe they have that guy at right tackle. Maybe it's DeAndre Wesley. Maybe it's Stephane Nembot. Maybe they have someone else at another position. Maybe they're that confident that Matt Judon's going to pop and be a starting outside linebacker opposite Terrell Suggs. Who knows? But very clear that they still have a lot of work to do, even with the increased level of activity that we've seen from Ozzie Newsome and company here over the first 4 or 5 days of free agency.
He is Luke Jones. Baltimore Luke finds him out on Twitter. And meanwhile, do you want to make fun of the Redskins? Because I at least want to. I'm going to do a lot of that this week. I'm going to talk to some DC people about the Caps and the Wizards and the Terps. And inevitably, I don't bother much with the Nationals, quite frankly. And we haven't bothered even a whole lot with the Orioles here thus far because they haven't played games that mattered. And we've got a lot of stuff going on, including a snowstorm this week. But you want to pick on the Redskins and have a go at that? It is kind of juicy and delicious now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, we talked about it at the end of last week. I mean, Scott McLuhan, a terrific talent evaluator, was no secret that he dealt with alcohol issues. The Redskins, they knew that going in, so you can't kind of play the card that you're stunned by. If he was having an issue, there's lots of debate whether how much of that was legitimate and how much of that was Bruce Allen and the up top being jealous of McLuhan and not being on the same page and using that as a way to get rid of him. I mean, it's just unthinkable. We talked about this a couple years ago with Dan Duquette with the Blue Jays pursuing him in December, and we talked about the back and forth of that. Where the Orioles stood, the fact that Toronto, really, that was kind of considered, not exactly cool to do that in the middle of an off season. But we talked about how crazy, how disruptive that was. But it's not as though that happened on the first day of free agency in the way that it's very clear in the NFL it's an event. Baseball, it's kind of a soft opening. You typically don't see free agents all go running and finding a new team on the first day. The market takes some time to marinate and kind of evolve. The NFL is not like that. So this idea that you let your GM go on the first day of free agency, even if he hadn't been doing any work for them the last couple weeks, but when you announce that on the first day of free agency, it is just the epitome of dysfunction. I mean, the epitome of all the good that they might have been able to have over the last couple of years where they made the playoffs last year and they had a couple back-to-back winning seasons and looked like they might have been on the track to being maybe not a perennial contender, but at least looked like they were in good shape. They had Kirk Cousins. I mean, debate where he ranks in the quarterback hierarchy. But
they weren't embarrassing themselves lately,
I mean,
right?
They look like a team.
It's kind of like the Orioles. They haven't embarrassed themselves on the field, but we are 2 years away from their general manager trying to walk out the door and the owner won't let him. You know, it's not like the Orioles are functioning normally like our government is. It's not. I mean, the Orioles have managed to Band-Aid it, and certainly Buck Showalter and Manny Machado, and good play have deodorized a lot of the issues that's still going with the Orioles. Need I remind you, I won't have a press pass on opening day. Meanwhile, the kid who owns the team is tweeting about Donald Trump taking away press passes. It's mind-blowing. But the Washington thing, when they start to win and they get a quarterback and they hit on a couple of draft picks and they got a coach that has the last name Gruden, who's not a joke, you tend to think, oh, well, Danny's grown up and it's all fine down there. It's never that way. It never corrects itself. It can mask itself, but dysfunction and ego and that ideology, it never goes away. It's still out there on Twitter at 2 a.m. It is.
Yeah, and it all starts at the top with ownership, and we've talked about that with the Orioles over 14 straight years of losing, and even now with winning some of the challenges that they have, quite frankly. But I guess you could say the Redskins were able to sign Terrell Pryor. I guess they get him on a 1-year deal. So
you're just reaching now, dude.
Well, I mean, hey.
Do you think anybody's had a great week?
I'm not saying I would have turned my nose at Terrell Pryor, but I'm just saying. I guess they were able to do that over the weekend, but I mean, you just look at how everything stands there. They have a quarterback who clearly doesn't want to be there. They lost their talented offensive coordinator. They lost their top 2 receivers. I mean, it's just, as much as we can talk about issues that the Ravens have and things that they still need to do with their roster, at least they're not talking about firing their GM on the first day of free agency and, having a leaked story to the Washington Post where basically you just completely trash the guy that you show to the curb and just an absolute mess. I'm glad that's not my mess to deal with. I'll put it that way.
Anybody a big winner this week that you think, obviously the Browns picking up Osweiler in that second. But I mean, I think it's been an uneventful kind of week, and I don't think any team has gone out there and the way the Red Sox did in the offseason and sort of swashbuckling, and never that's, winning free agency means nothing, but you'd like to look at it and say, well, the Patriots picked up Brandon Cooks, right? I mean, there's something to be said for that. The rich got richer.
I think you do look at New England probably. I think that's a good one. I think, you mentioned teams that have done well over the last, Oakland was great last year with what they were able to bring. I'll say this, and I'll keep it in the AFC North. I do like what Cleveland's done with its offensive line. I think whoever's going to be playing quarterback for them, which it's clearly not going to matter for them in the big picture until they have a quarterback, but I do think that's a pretty darn good offensive line now. So if they ever get their quarterback at some point here in the near future, then that's going to be a plus for them. I'll say, as I'm thinking of winners, I'll tell you a loser: the Cincinnati Bengals. They lost arguably their second and third best offensive players in Whitworth and Zeitler on their offensive line. I mean, you're talking about an offensive line that had its issues anyway, and they lost their two best linemen. It's just the Bengals are absolutely going in the wrong direction. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But I think winners. I think we mentioned New England. I think. It is one of those things where you look, there isn't necessarily that.
Well, the Ravens are winner because they kept Brandon Williams,
done
right?
A nice job. I think mainly with keeping some of their own. Quite frankly, I think the Dolphins have done a nice job to kind of build on where they were. So, but you're right. I don't think there hasn't been a team that stood out like the Raiders did last year, where you're like, holy cow. One, they had all the cap space, but two, you looked at the additions they made. And the proof was in the pudding. They made the playoffs this year. They would have been a dangerous team in the playoffs had Carr not hadn't broken his ankle at the end of the season. So, it's definitely one of those years with free agency where I don't necessarily look at any one team that has been an overwhelming winner, other than the couple I mentioned. And I'll say this. Offensive linemen, some really mediocre left tackles out there got some really big money in some of these contracts. And I'm not even talking about Rick Wagner. I'm talking about guys that, quite frankly, weren't good last year. And you see
Vladimir Dukas got a deal, right?
And I'm not even talking about him, but some of these other moves that were. Some of these teams desperate for left tackle.
But I would say the O-line desperate thing is that the draft doesn't look thick.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking, I'm going to get a player in April, not even using a 1 or a 2. Am I really going to make a difference and get a guy on the field? The only way I'm going to get a guy on the field is to get a guy that's out there. And that part did feel desperate over the weekend.
Yeah. Carolina signed Matt Khalil to be their left tackle. He struggled big time last year. I know Riley Reif did not have a very good year. There's some guys who got paid when you kind of wondered why they were getting paid. So, but it is a product of what is or isn't available in the draft, and we see that every year. I was kind of surprised on the flip side. We talked about the offensive line. This group of wide receivers, which wasn't a terrific group, but you had guys, Alshon Jeffrey, a pillow contract, Terrell Pryor, a 1-year deal, some other guys.
Kenny Stills re-up with the Dolphins.
Yeah, he got a nice deal, but not as lucrative as was once thought. They're really, there weren't. I would say probably Pierre Garçon probably got the richest contract relative to the fact that he's going to be 31 years old. And
part of that's the Niners are giving money away, right?
Yeah, exactly, and they have money to burn pretty much. So, that's the wide receiver position on the flip side of talking about offensive line and how they were probably overvalued. I think there's some wide receivers. That's why I was a little surprised that the Ravens, and look, I'm not saying a guy like a Kendall Wright or a Kenny Britt would have been an end-all, be-all, but they need somebody, and I don't think you can just go into the draft and say, well, let's pick a receiver in the first 3 rounds, and we'll put that guy with Wallace.
I think they're still counting on Perryman, dude. I really do. I'm not saying I am or you should or we do. I'm just saying for now, my eyes tell me that whatever they've seen with Perryman, they're willing to continue down that road, and they see him as a real contributor next year, not maybe the question mark that you and I see. Maybe.
Well, I can believe he'll be a real contributor, but they're kidding themselves if they think he's going to be their number 1 receiver. He's not that kind of guy. He doesn't run the entire route tree. They need an intermediate guy. They need a guy in the mold of Steve Smith and Quan Bolden. Maybe they do bring back Kamar Aiken. Who knows? Kamar Aiken, there's been talk of him drawing interest, but hadn't signed a deal through the weekend. So, but they need someone of that ilk, though. You can't just have vertical guys. It's not going to work. So,
They're going to miss Steve Smith.
Maybe they are thinking that, but history would tell they're probably wrong then, based on how they've handled the wide receiver position over the years. So, that's the one position. I'll buy that they're going to get another corner. I'll buy that they're going to get a right tackle, or that one of these guys will develop that they have on the roster. I'll buy that they will find an edge rusher to throw into the mix with the guys they already have. But I will absolutely remain bullish and very skeptical on how they handle the wide receiver position, because, frankly, history says I should be. Let's call a spade a spade.
All right, man. We got plenty of catching up to do around here with the Terps on Thursday night. We got shoveling to do. Drive safely. Think safely. As my man Frankie said, order some pizza and Chinese. Just sort of hang out. We're going to get you through it here this week. You can go to the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. Luke and I will be Facebook Living. I'll be doing lots of content on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday leading into the weekend in March Madness, not to mention the Caps, the Wizards, the Orioles, the World Baseball Classic. We're kind of covering all the bases around here and making all the shots, as they say. Let's hope we play a little better than the Caps did over the weekend in California. Barry Trotz, head coach of the Caps, going to join us next Monday night at Greenmount Station in Hampstead. We'll be up there swabbing for the Bone Mare Registry, and for There Goes My Hero. So if you're a Caps fan north and west of town, please come see us. We'll look forward to that. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And for any of you Raven fans out there who want to go to London, our trip is on sale. Go to the Road Trips tab at WNST.net. We'll try to make that happen for you. Green Bay, Minnesota, Nashville, and Oakland on its way once the schedule comes out, probably about 3-4 weeks from now. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.